Genesis 17:1. There was a fellow who had to switch dentists, and he's at his first appointment at the new dentist. And as he's waiting, he sees on the wall a plaque of this person's identity and some of their credentials, and he thinks he recognizes the name, and he thinks it's a person he may have gone to school with. And so he gets into his appointment, and he looks and he says, well, that can't be the person I'm thinking of. They're gray-haired, balding, face wrinkled. It's not that person. So at the end of the appointment, he says to the dentist, did you happen to go to school locally here? I said, well, yeah. What year did you graduate? He said, well, I graduated in 72. And the person says, you were in my class. The dentist backs up, takes a fresh look at the person in his chair and says, well, what subjects did you teach? You ever look at somebody and think, they can't be my age? Yeah. Speaking of age, we read in Genesis 17, Abram is 99 years old. 99. It has been 24 years since God said, I want you to leave Haran, get into the promised land. It's been 13 years since Ishmael has been born. He's 99, Sarah's 89. And that's when God shows up and grants them a new word. We tend to think in terms of moments, like current events, fresh experiences in the now. But here's God who is at work in terms of years and centuries and millennia. It doesn't show up between verses 16 and 17, but we're supposed to understand when chapter 16 ends and chapter 17 starts, there is a 13-year gap. 13 years after Ishmael's born. That's the next time Abram is spoken to by God. 13 years of what? There's been no other revelation, no other working, no other promise. 13 years in this family, and this boy is growing, and you remember his name means that God hears. God knows what's going on in your life. Can you imagine saying, I haven't heard from God in 13 years? I haven't heard from God for 13 years. But then, when he's 99, the Lord appears. You see, you never know when God is going to make his next move in your life. You never know what morning you wake up and God is going to appear. He's going to speak. He's going to work. He's going to move. And it may be after a prolonged period of silence. It may be in the flurry of his activity. We just never know when God's going to make his next move. He's going to speak his next word. He's going to fulfill his promise. You just don't know. Right? We don't always know what he's doing in our life. Because my guess is if you spoke to Abram a month before and you ask him, so what's God doing in your life? Not much. I haven't heard from him in 13 years. We don't always know what he's doing. We can't always measure where we're at in his will, right? We just don't know what will happen tomorrow or next week or the week after that. We can't measure how far in or out, or it's very, very difficult to draw conclusions about this. Because God is at work, not just in these moments. We experience the moment. But remember, he's outside of time. And he's working across the span of ages. What we can do is trust that God is at work. Right? Those 13 years had meaning. They had meaning in the eyes and in the plans of God. And if they seemed silent and maybe even dry to them, it didn't mean God wasn't at work. We trust that he is at work. We trust his timing. Right? We trust that this end of 13 years, that's the moment when God knows they're ready, and he's ready, and the world's ready. And so we trust his timing even if we don't think it's right. And we trust that he's faithful. He has been speaking to this man over decades. And this day, he shows up freshly. So when you think of your life, don't think just in terms of today. Don't think in terms of your experience in this moment. Think in terms of God who is looking over you over decades, your entire lifespan, and where you fit in his plan and in the plan for the world. Think in much larger terms than just today. Because I'll tell you, if you think about just today, you're going to get artificial highs and you're going to get artificial lows. There'll be days you think, oh my goodness, it's over. But you'll know that tomorrow you're going to wake up and it's not going to be over. That God is going to step in and God is going to work. And you will notice that when God shows up to Abram at 99 years of age, God makes a commitment to him, and he asks for a commitment from him. Right? He renews this commitment, this covenant, and he asks for something. He says, for me, verse 3, verses 1 and 2, let me tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to confirm my covenant, and I'm going to increase you. Right? You've been waiting on these promises for 2.5 decades. Now is the time. This is what I am going to do. He says this for you. Verse 2, I want you to walk before me. Right? Walk in front of me, literally. I want you to be in front of my face. Right? I want you to understand that you're walking in front of me, and that I am watching and I'm seeing, and I'm with you, and I want you to be blameless, he says. I say, well, that sounds like a pretty high standard. Well, the word blameless means integrity. And I would remind you that integrity is not equal to perfection. Integrity is a mark of consistency. Right? It means walk before my face, live according to the truth. And what integrity is, when integrity makes a mistake, integrity says, I made a mistake. I'm sorry, will you forgive me? See, integrity makes right what integrity did wrong. Integrity is not a pledge of perfection. God isn't asking him, hey, I don't want you to ever sin again. I mean, he doesn't, but he knows that is impossible. You see, the person of integrity, the person who's blameless, they say, that's on me. God, forgive me. See, that's David, a man after God's own heart. He commits adultery with Bathsheba, but then he says, against you and you only have I sinned. When he's confronted, he repents. That's integrity. That's what God is asking for. From you, from me, and from Abram. And this comes at the age of 99. You see, in a relationship with God, in a covenant with him, we translate this into our terms. We receive the promises of God. God shows us, this is what I'm going to do. We receive that, but there comes a point where we have to demonstrate our commitment, right? We have to demonstrate our devotion and our surrender to this Word of God. And so here's God, and this is what he shows up on this day. And this covenant making, this covenant asking for a commitment, it's very personal for God. Very personal. If your view of God is he is set apart, he is not like you in any way, shape, or form, that's okay. But to think that he is impersonal, right? That he has no stake in what happens in your life and in this world. And that he has no feeling, some kind of machine. You're thinking of him wrongly. This is all very personal for him. You see, he sets the terms of what he's going to do in this life of Abram, in his family, and in the future. He sets the terms, and they are all incredibly generous. What's he say? I'm going to confirm my covenant. I'm going to increase your numbers. Right? I'm going to change your name. You're going to be the father of many nations. I'm going to make you fruitful. And he extends himself to Abram. And it's very, very generous. He offers himself, if you will. God puts himself forward to Abram with the possibility that God can be rejected. Puts himself out there, says, this is what I'll do. It's very possible that Abram could say, no, I don't want you. And I don't want that, because God gets rejected every day. God sent his son. And what happened to him? He got rejected. So let's not lose the personal investment of God in his relationships with people and with you and I. Because he puts himself out there generously. He says, here's what I would like to do in your life. And it's possible to say to him, no thank you. Because I've done it. You've done it. Usually we do it and we don't know what we're doing, but we do it. This is personal for God. See, he says in verse 3, when Abram falls face down, he says, as for me, or verse 4, as for me, this is my part. I am going to change your name, your future, your destiny for generations. This is me. I'm coming your way. Now let's read the following verses beginning in verse 9. Then God said to Abraham, as for you, you must keep my covenant, you, your descendants after you, for the generations to come. This is my covenant with you and your descendants after you. The covenant you are to keep. Every male among you shall be circumcised. You are to undergo circumcision, and it will be the sign of the covenant between me and you. For the generations to come, every male among you who is 8 days old must be circumcised, including those born in your household, or bought with money from a foreigner, those who are not your offspring. Whether born in your household or bought with your money, they must be circumcised. My covenant in your flesh is to be an everlasting covenant. Any uncircumcised male who's not been circumcised in the flesh will be cut off from his people. He's broken my covenant. God also said to Abraham, as for Sarah, your wife, you're no longer to call her Sarah. Her name will be Sarah. I will bless her, and I'll give you a son by her. I'll bless her so she'll be the mother of nations. Kings of peoples will come from her. Abraham fell face down. He laughed, and he said to himself, will a son be born to a man 100 years old? Will Sarah bear a child at the age of 90? And Abraham said to God, if only Ishmael might live under your blessing. Abraham, this is, put a footnote here at verse 18. Abraham was willing to settle for something else. He was willing to settle for something else. Verse 19, God said, yes, but your wife Sarah will bear you a son, and you will call him Isaac. I will establish my covenant with him as an everlasting covenant for his descendants after him. As for Ishmael, I've heard you, and I will surely bless him. I'll make him fruitful and will greatly increase his numbers. He'll be the father of 12 rulers, and I'll make him into a great nation. But my covenant I will establish with Isaac, whom Sarah will bear to you by this time next year. And when he had finished speaking with Abraham, God went up from him. Do you notice the phrase, as for, God says, as for me? And he says in verse 9, as for you. In verse 15, he says, as for Sarah. And then verse 20, as for Ishmael. You see, this is all very personal with God. He puts himself out there, and he understands what he wants to do in the lives of all these other people. God has worked through what this means for everybody involved. So he tells Sarah, look, all the principal individuals here, I'm way ahead of you. I'm way ahead of you. With your wife, with Ishmael, I know exactly what I'm doing. God has worked it all out for centuries to come. See, it's not just about this moment. God is looking past this moment way into the future, and the kings and the nations that are going to come, and a covenant that's going to be everlasting with a group of people. Please remember that the details and the days and the years of your life are personal for God. He's not impersonal, he's very personal. See, as for you, he knows exactly what he's doing. I'll say it again. The details, the days, and years of your life, they're personal for God. and the details and the days and years and the destiny of our world, it's personal for God. It's so personal that it's His world, and He's going to give His Son. It's so personal that He's going to die on the cross to save us, to save our world from our sin. That's how personal it is with God. It's personal here. It's always been personal. So God is able to be rejected. He's able to be turned from. He's able to be ignored. He's able to be looked on as impersonal, but far, far from it. What does God do here in this covenant? What is the commitment He's asking for? He's asking for a response of surrender and submission. As for me, this is what I'm going to do. But as for you, you show me your commitment to this relationship. You show it by surrendering your future to my good intentions. Right? God comes, here's His covenant, here's His good intentions, and He asks them to take a step of commitment, to make an act of surrender. To what? An onerous, hard will of God? No. To these good intentions, to bless and increase and multiply and be with them and their family for generations to come. And ultimately, this all winds up rolling down to you and I through one of the descendants of Abraham, the son of David, Jesus Christ. And the covenant that's everlasting, which He dies for and He asks us to surrender to. It's all good intentions. And for Abram, what's it going to be? And all the males in this group? Well, it's circumcision. You say, well, isn't that a little weird? Right? Good, you can nod your head. It just seems a little weird. Well, what's going on here? Well, it's not that weird. When you want a future, and you want a family, and you want a place, you're going to have children. And what God says is, I want you to take a mark of dependence upon me, a mark of surrender to me, of your ability to produce life, because it's not your ability, it's mine. In that mark says, I'm God's. He's my Lord. He's my owner. I'm under His authority, His direction. It's the mark of His ownership on me. I surrender to God my ability, or at least I think my ability to produce life, to have a family, and have a future. For us, our future is often lined up with money. For them, their future is lined up with children. You have no children, you've got no future. You have no way to protect yourself in this world. You have no way to provide for yourself in this world. You'll have no future. That's what it's wrapped up for them, and God says, this is what I want you to do. This is your act of submission to me. What about Sarah? What's she have to do? Well, she's going to give up her name. She's going to give up the timing of having a child. This isn't at her discretion. It's not that God has prevented her, it's just not the time. And He says, look, it'll be by this time next year. Right? Next year. You're still going to wait. She gives up the timing of a child. She gives up the right to name the child and that child's future. She can't have a son and name him whatever she wants. No, God says, you're going to name him Isaac. Because I heard you laugh. There's going to be more laughter coming. See, God has a sense of humor, doesn't He? They call him Isaac. They have 2 kids in this house. One, Ishmael. I hear. And the other, he laughs. And they live with that their whole life. And give up this child's future. I'm going to take Isaac, and I'm going to work through him. That's where the covenant is going to go through. And then there's Ishmael. What's he have to give up? Well, he's got to give up being and getting all the rights of the firstborn son. Right? He is not going to be the son of the covenant. He's got to give that up. He's got to defer the future to God's choice of Isaac. He's got to say, hey, that's quite all right. I'm happy to be secondary. I'm willing for you to continue your work through that child, through this kid that's 14 years my junior. That's okay, Lord. You go ahead and do that. You go ahead and care for the covenant in the future through him. I can take a different role in a different place. See, everybody's getting asked to surrender their future, to offer to God in this covenant relationship, to give it all to his good intentions. It's not like when they surrender this, something bad's going to happen. No, it's all good. It's God's design, his intent, and his purpose. And they're going to know his blessing in their act of surrender and in that response. So that's what God asks for. As for you, as for me, as for you, and you. So what happens? Look at verse 22. On that very day, Abraham took his son Ishmael, and all those born in his household or bought with his money, every male in his household, and he circumcised them as God told him. Abraham was 99 years old when he was circumcised, and his son Ishmael was 13. Abraham and his son Ishmael were both circumcised on that same day. And every male in Abram's household, including those born in his household or bought from a foreigner, was circumcised with him. Tough day in the tents of Abraham. Tough day. Here's Abraham's response to all of this. No delay. No questions. No, well, Lord, is this what you really... No confusion. Boom. He does it on that day. For every time you can look at Abraham and say, boy, you dropped the ball there. You got to look at moments like this and say, that is powerful obedience. That is a powerful act of submission and surrender. And you notice, Abram doesn't say, no, look, I'm going to do this, but if you don't want to, you don't have to. Nope, you're in my household. This is how it's going to be. There's a lesson on male leadership, gentlemen, right there. A sermon all in and of itself. But Abraham says, this is how it's going to be. Because God said, if you don't, you're not part of this group. Right? You're not under the covenant. What you're saying by not participating in this is you're saying, God, I reject you. God says, okay. But Abraham gives no option. This is how it's going to be. On that very day. You know, there are points in time of fresh surrender to the future. God is at work in terms of years and centuries. But for us, it becomes these moments in time where we look and we say, Lord, I hear what you're asking. You're asking me to lay this all down. My future, my destiny, the direction, what will happen with my children and the generations to come. You're asking me to surrender freshly to you. Those times come, and I'm convinced that they come in two ways. One is special points, big moments, these turning points and these transitions, but it's also a daily thing, right? It's not something you can just do at a point in time. We have to surrender freshly and daily, right? We die daily. We offer ourselves as a living sacrifice to God. So it comes in two ways, but sometimes there's these special moments. And this is one for Abraham. It's that day when God asks for it, and it's that day that he does it and the rest of them do it. And maybe for some of us, it's today, right? Maybe it's one of those days where you hear and you see and you read and you kind of grab your forehead and you say, well, that's what God is asking of me today. I'm at one of those junctures where I'm looking down the road and God says this is what he intends, and he's inviting me into his good intentions, and he's asking for me to commit to it, to surrender to it. Take my hands off it and go the way he wants with what he says. Maybe it's today. I encourage you, if it seems hard, if it seems costly, maybe it's going to seem awkward. I cannot imagine what this was like for this guy to turn and say to every male in his household, this is how it's going to be. Not easy. Costly. Awkward, right? Can you say the word awkward about this whole scene? You're 99. Your boy's 13. It's awkward. Sometimes it is. But God is asking for commitment. God is asking for us some days to do what feels uncomfortable. Why? Because he's got the future covered. And what's down the road is in his hands. He sees it and he knows it. This is what he's asking for. Maybe it's today. We're going to close with that song that these gentlemen ministered in earlier, titled, Take My Life and Let It Be. Here it is. Let it be consecrated, Lord, to thee. My moments, my days, they're yours. Let's pray.